Today on the Idiot's Guide, we find out, is there a silver lining to inflation and recession? And if you're a sustainability kind of guy or gal, you can now be laid to rest in a mushroom coffin. I'm your host, Adam Richardson, aka the Prophet Hacker, and I'm joined by the man in charge, Mr. Joe Haslam. Welcome to the Idiot's Guide. Okay, everybody, we are going to jump right into some of this stuff. But first, I kind of want to. I would ask this question to our listener that's out there, maybe a couple, because I don't know. You can be you, and I hope you do. But this question is do you know what inflation is? Or if you're like me, I'm like, well, I can do that to a balloon. I can, inflate my ego. I can, there's lots of things that I think we can inflate. But inflation in and of itself, in an economic sense, during all of the political turmoil and unrest in our country and the looming possible, everybody's screaming around saying the sky is falling, recession is coming. And I still go, okay, today's rate's like 4.93. What's the big old deal? How does that deal to what? So Joe, help please, because I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm way in over my head.
No, yeah, and this is something that a lot of people don't understand. They hear the words inflation. They see the news, inflation's up. The Fed talks about fighting deflation. All these things that happen, it's really important that we understand to know how it all works together. Now, at the beginning, when Adam and I were talking about this subject, he made a point to remind me not to get boring with this. And he's going to be my comic relief during this process. So just be aware, this can get somewhat technical, but it's also important to understand. So hopefully we can make this in a way that is understandable, that it is not too boring, so that we can actually pass this information on, because it is really, really important. But when we're talking about inflation, essentially all it is it's talking about the price of goods versus the value of the dollar. Okay. And so if you think about, you can go online and you can look at, what was a dollar worth 100 years ago. Okay. And since then, what is it worth today? So we watch old TV shows and we see them. I grew up watching The Waltons. Okay. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite shows. And they go in and they buy, a bunch of candy for 5 cents. There's nowhere in the world today, nowhere in the US today, you can go and get candy, a handful of candy for 5 cents.
If you reference nickel candy, nobody knows what you mean. It's literally, it doesn't exist. You know, but I mean, I know what nickel candy is because in my generation, I heard that, but it was still like, it was quarter candy by my generation.
Right.
So,
And so how does that value change from, I think they were representing around the 1930s in the Waltons. Mm-hmm. So that would be about 100 years ago now.
Yeah.
And so as we're talking about, what changed from 100 years ago to now, what that is inflation. So the dollar doesn't buy as much as it used to. Okay. And so what that means is we cannot buy a handful of candy for 5 cents. Now we get maybe a piece of candy for 25 cents. I think if you go to like these Party Cities or Zurchers or whatever those places are, you can get a pound of candy or a handful of candy for $1. But that's what inflation is. Over time, the value of the dollar goes down.
I had this conversation with my son last night or yesterday, and we were talking about value menus on, like food places, and how that's even like, that's not a true picture of inflation itself. That's also market and marketability. Like what truly gave away this $5 menu thing was the $5 footlong from Subway that launched every other business to be like $5 lunchbox, $5 burger combo, $5 and then gone are the dollar menus. Now they're like $3 or $4 menus, and you're like, oh, that's not bad. That's okay. And I'm like, no, it's terrible. It's what it is. It's like, instead of it being $4, it's $16, and yep. that's ridiculous.
When I was in high school, I had an amazingly fast metabolism, and I finally had money for the first time in my life when I was a teenager and working. And so I would go to Arby's, and they had a 5 for $5 roast beef sandwich lunch deal. Not like the mini roast beef that they do today. Because I think they've got a 5 mini roast beefs for around $5 now. But back then it was 5 roast beefs. I would eat that whole thing for lunch. People would just be staring at me. But that was $5 just, what is that, 20 years ago now?
Yeah.
And now you're getting literally half as much food for the same price. Now, a lot of people generally understand that, okay, inflation simply means that my dollar is worth less. I can't buy as much with my dollar. But I think going back to your original question, what does that mean? Why does that happen? What goes on? And so essentially what happens is we're looking at the entire economic cycle. Now, we as the final consumer are just the end of that cycle. So when we buy something, it is built up with all of the pieces that went into that final product. So if you think about baking a cake,
okay.
You have your final result, the cake, but what went into that cake? You had to cook it in the oven. You had to put all of the ingredients together. You start with the wet ingredients, mix those together. Then you put the dry ingredients, put all those together. And then you mix the wet and dry ingredients together. And now you've got that. And then you put it in the oven, you bake it. Now you've got I'm
going to have you make a cake for me, because it sounds like this could be a really delicious cake.
Well, there you go.
a hidden gem of Joe.
That's right. But when you think about the price, so that final value of that cake mixes the cost of those eggs, the cost of the milk, the cost of the flour, the cost of the energy putting it in the oven. And so all of those result in the final value of that cake.
Yeah.
And then you think about how much time I spent baking that cake. How much is my time worth?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about, okay, all these things start to add up. So we start working backwards when we're talking about inflation. So you talked about restaurants. Okay, so dollar menus don't really exist anymore. Part of the reason for that is employees need more money. So in a lot of states, the minimum wage has been increased, which is great. People now have more money.
Right.
Well, the problem is, since they have more money, they go out and buy more things, but the things that they're producing that is costing that money that they're getting a wage for has now gone up. And this
because it needs to raise costs, because you need to pay that employee more for them to be able to spend more. Yeah.
So if we go back to the cake example, so if I spend an hour baking this cake and I get paid $10 an hour, that cake, let's say all the other ingredients cost $5. That cake costs $15 to make for my 1 hour of time spent plus all the ingredients. If I raise that by $1, so now I'm making $11 an hour, we're now up, that cake costs $16. So if I sell that cake for $20, I made a $5 profit originally. Great. Well, now on the new price cycle, I am only making $4 of profit. Well, that's no good to me, because I want to make $5. And so I'm the man in charge. I want to make $5. That's what I was making before. So I'm going to raise the price of my cake to $21. Okay.
Logically. Yeah.
Right. And so now the final consumer, when I sell this cake to Adam, he now has to pay me $21, whereas before it was $20, simply because it cost me more.
Back in my day, cakes were only $20, Joe.
Exactly. And so we've got this perpetual cycle, and it's not just that, because we'll go further back along the cycle, but that's one of the first areas when we talk about restaurants.
Okay.
And this is why a lot of restaurants, this is why a lot of companies try to push back on wage increases, is because they will make less money. Now, I'm not going to get into the attitude of whether that's right or wrong. We're in an economy, we're in a macro, micro economy going on in different areas. And whether it's right or whether it's wrong, that's what's going on behind the scenes. That's why they are pushing back, because they will potentially lose money.
Okay.
Okay. Or they have to pass that cost on to the end consumer, which means the demand for that product will go down because now it costs more. And so they're also going to lose money. So this is why businesses generally don't like to do that, but they cave to the pressure and they have to. So dollar menus go away. And we now have a $1, $2, $3 menu at McDonald's instead of just a value menu or whatever they used to call
I don't
it.
even think, yeah, I mean, it's like one under two, and
Yeah.
it's not great.
Yeah. Now, and then, so you go further back along this line, we look at the ingredients. Okay, so milk. What does it cost for the milk? You've got to have the farmland to raise the cattle. You've got to have the workers to feed the cattle. You've got to have all of the equipment, which can be very expensive, to milk the cattle to make it efficient. And then you've got to test it. Clarkson's Farm is a really great example of a lot of the stuff that goes into all of this food production that we as the end consumers don't ever really even think about.
Do they just like post that information out there?
Have you not seen Clarkson's Farm?
No.
Okay, so Jeremy Clarkson it was a presenter on Top Gear, and then they had their own show. I'm a huge fan of Top Gear and the Grand Tour. I love cars. And so he lived on a big farm, and so he decided, I'm going to farm my own land and record it. So they made a whole TV show. They just finished the second season and talked about a lot of the hardships that people in England are facing, a lot of farmers are facing with a lot of the issues. And so it's a really good example to see what really goes on and what the real costs are. His first year as a farmer, the final episode, they showed how much he made. I think the end total was he made 8 pounds after a year's worth of farming.
Wow.
And so, and that's the thing. He says, if I didn't have the money from my other activities, I couldn't survive on this. And so he really points out, how little farmers get on this food production. But all those costs go into the cost of that milk, go into the cost of those eggs. We don't think about it as the end consumer, but that comes into play. And so now we're getting this milk, that milk produced by the farmer and all the cost that goes into that. And then it has to be shipped to the grocery store. The grocery store has to stock it, which has employees. So they have to pay their employees. And then they have to pay their fees for rent or heating, cooling, whatever for that product is. And all of that adds to this cost of the milk, and they have to make a profit. We'd like to think they don't have to make a profit, and maybe they make too much of a profit, but they have to make a profit no matter what. And so that adds to this. So going back through the line, the employees, if we raise their rates, that causes milk to go up in price. If we have to increase the property taxes pay for schools, but property taxes also mean rents go up. And so the rent for these grocery stores goes up, price of food goes up. Okay. And so as we go further along this cycle back, you're seeing that all of these extra costs add up to that final result. And so all we're doing as we raise people's wages, as we raise the property taxes for better schools or whatever is going on with those property taxes, all these things, sales taxes, all the things that go on with all those costs, all they're doing is just raising that end result price. But realistically, their employees are now making more money. The landlord is making more money. And that way they're able to pay their employees, who can then go out and buy more food.
So it essentially enables itself.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. That's why we're in this constant upward spiral of costs. We're always building on the prior cycle of increased costs. Now, out of control inflation, like what we're in right now, is simply because the government gave free money to everyone. We had the PPP loans, we had the EIDLs, we had, I think there were some stimulus payments that went out. All these things that went out to the average person meant there was more money.
Yeah.
Well, when there's more money in the economy, go and spend it. Now, and this is great. This is the reason why governments do this. A lot of people will, talk bad about these kinds of programs and say, oh, you shouldn't do it. There are arguments on both sides of whether to or whether not to. I'm not going to get into those arguments, but I'm just talking about the economic principles behind it.
It makes me think about getting a stimulus check and talking with my friends who got stimulus checks and, comparing the size of our stimulus checks and, yours
Comparing
is
sizes,
that big. And then turning around and saying, what are you going to do with your money kind of stuff? And some people are like, well, I'm just going to put it in savings. I was like, well, that's boring. Okay. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to buy video game, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But one that I heard probably the most often is Legos. And I'm going to bet that because the demand increase of Legos, because of stimulus checks, increased the cost of Legos now. That's reaching, but I'm sure that they knew full well that product was in high demand with those stimulus checks. So,
there is no doubt. So we're buying a new pool this year. My family is. Mm-hmm. We bought a pool 3 years ago, and the pool we're getting is about twice the size of the pool we bought 3 years ago. It's the same price because the demand for it has now gone down. That we're out of the pandemic cycle. So people are able to go to a public pool or things like that. Whereas back then, everyone was locked down. Everyone wanted the pool in their backyard.
Yeah, it's true.
And so demand goes back down, price goes down. Demand goes up, price goes up. That's the economic cycle. That's the supply and demand curve.
Okay.
So were you gonna?
No, I'm making a thinking face because I'm trying to connect to the next layer of this, which is, once we gather this inflation stuff, how does a recession happen?
And so, going back to the money that's being distributed, because that has a strong play with it as well. And so when we got all of this money, now we can go out and buy a bunch of stuff, which means businesses now have more money. Businesses have more money, they can start paying people more, which means there's more money in the cycle. When you have a lot of extra money, that means that prices go up. Mm-hmm. And your dollar buys less. Inflation.
Okay.
And so because they're just going to raise their prices. Demand is up. Price goes up.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So your dollar is now worth less. So because everyone had so much free money, it brought on inflation. And so deflation, which is what the Fed is trying to do right now, they're trying to deflate the economy, is the exact opposite. And so what they're doing is they're raising the interest rates on purpose to make it harder for people to spend their money. They make it harder to access money, harder to access loans. They make it more expensive for someone to buy a home. Now, we may think that they can't be doing that on purpose. They can't be purposely making it hard for me to buy a home. No, that's exactly what they are doing. Mm-hmm. They are trying to make it hard so that you don't spend your money. Or if you do spend your money, that you don't have extra money to spend. Because when you don't have extra money to spend, now businesses have less demand. And what happens with lower demand? Price goes down.
Yeah.
And when the price comes back down by these businesses in order to get more profit, because it's the idea of you can buy something for $10, but you're only going to have 10 customers. Or by cutting the price in half at $5, you're going to have 100 customers. And so you make $500 on the lower price, $100 on the higher price. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that demand idea works, by lowering prices. So companies will lower prices in order to get consumers to be able to buy again, simply because the Fed is increasing these rates and make it harder to access money. That's what deflation is.
Okay.
And so that's why everything's so tight right now, because the Fed is purposefully making it hard to spend money.
I think an interesting point is to kind of go like the comparison between like purchasing a house right now is even difficult. I mean, it's expensive to buy a house, but I don't think that necessarily the problem is house buying. Like the demand to purchase a house, like, you know, in our market here, like skyrocketed home values. And so we saw an inflation of value there. And it's starting to deflate. So I guess in that sense, there's a little bit of sense to it. But I think more people is more the frivolous spending or credit card usage that now, you know, you go back a couple of years and there's a habit that's there and people spend money and spend money that isn't theirs on a credit card. And now they're getting just taken over the coals with how high the interest is just to pay that back. And I think that that's, you know, that's the harder pill to swallow is like, well, okay, like I don't want more debt, but I also don't want to be whipped harder with the debt that I have, you know? And I think that's kind of what it feels like.
But that is exactly what the Fed is trying to do. So with credit cards, which are based on the prime rate, which is what the Fed controls, that's gone up about 5-ish points. That's percentage points. So it was at roughly 3%, the base rate. So that's the rate that banks can borrow from the Fed. Mm-hmm. And then when they lend to you at, say, 10%, they're making the difference on that. That's the idea behind the Fed rate, the prime rate versus the other rates that you get from a bank. So when you look at your credit cards, the banks are now borrowing at a much, much higher rate, which means your credit card rate has gone up. So if you were at, say, 21% before, you're now at 26%. Mm-hmm. And so that 26% adds up to, let's say you have $10,000 on your credit card, and it's gone up by 5% in interest. So that is, what is that? $500 a year now more out of your pocket on the existing debt. Nothing you did. It's just the Fed. Well, what the Fed is looking at is you now have $500 less to spend. And that's good news for them. The Fed wants that. And I know it sounds horrible and backwards, but that's exactly what the Fed wants, because you have now $500 less to spend.
Hey guys, good news. That's not good news.
Not for the average consumer right away.
Sure.
But in time.
Gee, Fed, thanks for changing my spending habits.
That's exactly it. Over time, they will hopefully force businesses to reduce prices. Now, we're seeing some of this with these huge, massive layoffs, with a lot of these problems of companies dropping their employees, you know, cutting costs, all these things that are going on. Now, it sucks for those employees, but you know who it's great for? The people who don't work for them, but who consume their products. Mm-hmm. And so that means that the prices can go down. And so it is a cycle, it's a time frame of how long that happens and how long that takes. Okay. Now, there are a couple of different, I'm not going to go into a lot of the boring stuff about economics. Yeah, if you think this is boring, it doesn't even come close.
Guys, this is not boring, Joe. No, this is exciting, Joe.
Yes, this is the not boring version of this stuff. You know, we can get into the arguments of classical or Keynesian economics and things like that.
Nope. I'm already starting to fall asleep.
There you go. If you start hearing
when you use $10 words like that, that is a sign I'm going to go to sleep.
Yeah. So just know you can turn off the podcast when you start hearing Adam snoring.
So what? Okay, so from this inflation, from this picture, I think a while ago we had this discussion about recession, and
yes,
I kind of had it was almost like a word picture that came to mind about like ocean waters and how they recede, but it's honestly like it felt more in our conversation about an empowerment of the people being able to do that with what we do as far as our spending power. So.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about recessions or depressions or any of those variable terms, what you're talking about is a significant rate of inflation. So how does the general economy change? Mm-hmm. And so if you have a drop in the overall economy of people are going to get upset with me because I'm going to get these numbers wrong. But it is 10% for a recession, 20% for a depression. Could have those numbers wrong. It could be 5 and 10. But it is an indicator, a marker of the general economy of when it decreases in consumption or production.
Okay.
Those are the technical terms. That's the technical definition of a recession or a depression. Now, that doesn't mean anything to us as consumers. It really doesn't. From a practical standpoint, okay, when we're talking about practicality of what really is a recession, well, it simply means that there's a disconnect between the consumer buying power and the producer selling ability. Okay, so we talked about it takes time for, the consumer is going to be caught between a rock and a hard place for a while until the producers reduce their prices.
Right.
In order to catch up with the general economy. Okay. So a recession or depression is essentially when that takes too long.
Okay.
And the producers haven't caught up to that need to reduce yet. They're trying to hold on. Prices are still too high. Consumers are not able to buy. And so because they're not able to buy, businesses go out of business.
Okay.
And they lay off their employees, which then cause more people not to be able to consume, which then causes more businesses to go under because they can no longer sell their goods, which causes more people to be out of work. And so it's really just a matter of pushback.
Almost like natural, though. I mean,
it is.
I feel like a lot of stuff they talk about, oh, well, it's the supply chain issues. Mm-hmm. And you're like, dude, maybe 3 years ago, but now, I mean, like, this is self-induced at this point. So, if it has any ties with inflation, then, which it does, then that's part of the issue. It's not a supply chain issue unless you're still trying to negotiate lowering prices, which you are, but the society is going to create that because people won't have as much money and won't be willing to spend that money, and that will force the hand of the supply to say, okay, all right, we relent.
Right. And the government tries to step in and control that quote unquote invisible hand. The invisible hand is really different.
We all love government control. It's so fun.
So the two economic principles, the Keynesian, so I'm using these, what you call them, $10 words, Keynesian and classical economics again, is really the idea of who's really in charge of all these changes. Now, I very much believe in the invisible hand, that there is and this goes back hundreds of years.
Wizard of Oz. I know. I've seen the show.
Yes, exactly. There you go. And so it's the idea that there is an invisible force in the market controlling everything. Whereas the other economic thought is that it's the government's responsibility to step in and take charge of how the economy functions. Now, whether you're Republican or Democrat, Independent, Green Party, maybe Libertarians get out of this, but just about any political party actually does follow a general Keynesian economic principle. As much as Republicans might argue, from a true economic standpoint, they very much follow the government is responsible for maintaining the economy.
Okay.
And so it's the idea of a difference between, are they stepping in to take control, such as with stimulus checks, such as with loans and things of that nature, and then raising the interest rates,
Raising the debt ceiling, current
ceiling.
Negotiations. Yay.
Exactly.
Okay.
All of these things come back to, what is that level of connection and disconnection between the producers and the consumers? The greater the disconnect, we're in a recession.
Okay.
If it's even greater, we're in a depression. And so that really is what it comes down to. And that's why it's so important to understand the economic principles. Because when you understand the cycle, it makes it much easier to understand your role in the cycle, as well as your role in recessions and depressions as a consumer, as well as a producer.
Well, you heard it here, guys. You should go study, what was it, Canadian? No, I'm sorry, Keynesian. Never mind.
Economics.
Don't study. Just trust Joe.
Now, again, these are simplified ways of looking at it.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I mean, people get degrees in economics. They go through hundreds of hours of topics of this in a much more serious nature. So these are simplified ways of thinking about it. So don't yell at me, any economists in the comments or anything like that.
No. It's pronounced Canadian.
But it really is important to understand that when you're complaining about the prices of your food, it's not necessarily the farmer's problem. Mm-hmm. Because there are a whole lot of people between the farmer and you that got to be paid. The farmer's got to pay their people. And realistically, what it comes down to is it's the middleman of the producer to the consumer where the problem is. So places like the grocery stores or the restaurants or anything like that then add to those costs because they want the profit. It's that profit incentive and they want as much as possible.
So if I go to the store then and I fill my cart with groceries from every part of the world, and I get up to the clerk and I'm like, I want to talk to your manager. I'm going to straighten this out right now. I should pay at least 4% less than these are priced at. Goodness, let's do our part to start the recession off nice and sturdy. Just kidding. That's a terrible idea. Well, please don't do this. I told you in one of the descriptions, I said, don't try this at home. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an example of don't try this at home. Okay.
That's exactly it. Now, consumers do have power, through our spending habits. So if you want to reduce if you want to get your grocery store to reduce their prices by 4%, you don't go talk to a manager. We might have too many Karens out there right now.
Can't use that word anymore.
No, sorry. No, what you want to do is you reduce your spending by 4%. So you don't buy as much.
Okay.
And so what that's going to do is
my kids don't eat as much. Yeah. It's just
you buy instead of the name brand corn, you buy the generic brand corn.
Okay.
You instead of buying to excess where you're going to throw away a lot of food waste, you be smarter about your shopping so you can reduce the overall but still get the same nutrition, get the same calories and everything out of your food.
I think I brought this up last time, and I'm actually noticing a decrease recently. But where I've I noticed this over the last probably year and a half, where they've been talking about inflation for a while. It's just kind of still rampant. But this was probably over the last year, I started noticing I buy cereal for my kids. I know. You shouldn't buy cereal. You should be like me and make your own cereal. Whatever. What do you freaking do? But I buy cereal because it's easier and faster. And I don't buy box cereal because it is horribly overpriced. You get 3 ounces for, like $8. So I get the bag cereal. Well, that's where I saw the robbery. That was, like I'd see this, it literally over the course of probably about 6 months went down in ounces and up in price. So it compounded the issue just by reduction in amount and in quantity, and like an increase in the cost, almost nearly double what it was previously. So at least a sizable difference, almost $2 more. Yeah. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like even on sale is overpriced. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's a bad cycle, because what you're essentially trying to do by buying less or changing your what you're buying, brand name to generic, is you're essentially asking for these producers to lay off employees. I know it sounds really sucky, but that's what you have to do in order to get the prices back to normal.
I mentioned silver lining, Joe, and that is not.
Okay, silver lining.
That's a sad story. Like you're essentially you're responsible if you don't buy Nestle.
And that is exactly it. And you don't realize the implications of your choices until you actually go through what is my buying habits going to do. But you're constrained by the job that you have.
I think one of the things you can realize this is that you have. I've kind of been in tune with some people who want to boycott certain brands for whatever their perspective or whatever their marketing choices are currently. And I'm not going to go down the road of how, what I think about it, but it's an example of the buying power that we have as a consumer to be able to influence. Even like you're watching, not the boycott side of it, but just businesses because of the inflation. Like you're saying, if I choose not to purchase this because there's an off brand that's more affordable and tastes the same, if it's a food brand, that business, you've seen them fold. Big names that are no longer names anymore or they merge into something other bigger because they can't sustain by themselves anymore. Yep. And that's really kind of going like you got too big for your britches. And then when somebody said, nope, I'm not paying for you, you couldn't hold your britches up anymore. Yeah. So,
and that's really what it is. And so as consumers, we forget that we have the power.
Yeah.
We have the ultimate control over the economy, because places like Walmart or other grocery stores, I can't think of any to name right now, places like Target or any of these stores that are bringing these goods in for us to buy, they're negotiating the deals with the actual producers. And so they're telling the producer, we'll give you $10 for your goods, and then we'll sell it for $20. And so they're making that $10 in profit. Now, again, some of that's going to, rent and staff and things like that. But that's where that idea comes in of, if we're the consumer, we're not buying that product. It's up to the grocery stores to recognize they need to either reduce that price, get better agreements with the producers. And it's up to the producers to say, no, I'm not holding back on my profits. You're the one that needs to take that loss. And that's where, as both the producers and the consumers, the farmers and the eaters, where we have to really band together and say, this is our economy and we have the ultimate control. Yeah. Because we've got too many middlemen in this process that are not conforming to the market system. And that's what's prolonging recessions. That's what's prolonging depressions. That's what's prolonging inflation. It's these middlemen stores, I guess, for lack of a better word, that are a lot of the problem. But we as consumers have the power to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to buy those goods. Now, again, it's not going up to the cashier and saying, I want to talk to your manager. Because honestly, that cashier, they're probably making way too little money. Absolutely, because those stores want to keep as much profits as possible. And you're just making their lives a whole lot worse.
You are now I can't use that name anymore because it's now become a public issue.
But no, you have to remember, as a consumer, you make choices and you control the economy through your buying choices, not through your words yelling at the cashier. It's not their fault. They're just working a job.
But buying choices, buying things that are off-brand or, the just generic stuff. And that goes to like whether you're talking about clothing, whether you're talking about, expensive tires, in all different directions, if you start looking for the other off-brand opportunities, although you're not going to get the same level of quality, maybe, I go to say, like, if I go get Oats cereal, from like a bag cereal, and I get Cheerios, I can taste the difference immediately. I can smell the difference in those. I'm like, this one is literally what you feed a horse. This one is what people eat. So, but like, not everything is that drastic. Usually it's not, but it's something I had discovered. But I guess the point is the silver lining in this is, listener, you have some power in this. You have some influence. And I think the big part about that is to make some choices and accept the fact that if there's certain kind of debts, maybe credit card debt that you're dealing with, the Fed is trying to help you by making that payment more expensive.
Yeah.
Although it's kind of like forced educational finance education. You should have done that for us in high school. Thank you. But that's okay. Like right now, and I'm really far, I'm actually further away from high school than I am, retirement age.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where I think the silver lining is this is that you aren't helpless. You aren't, stuck not being able to do anything. They're trying to encourage in a little bit more aggressive way
Yep.
to change your spending habits.
And remember, this is the exact same, well, it's the exact opposite, but it's the same principle behind when the government gave us money.
Yeah.
It's to encourage the economy to function a certain way. And so by increasing the rates and getting hit with, hopefully deflation, by controlling that spending, they're hoping to get us back to normal. Okay. And so remember, you've got to think about the entire cycle. Don't just think about one piece.
Yeah. I was there with, I was working when the mortgage bubble popped and the first recession with Obama and that kind of stuff. And this one feels different, definitely, but
Slower.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing I think that happened was it was such a fast reaction when the mortgage bubble popped. You started seeing this. This is kind of like a slow boil that's been happening and really forecast for a number of years, saying like, guys, you know what this is going to do? You know what this is? Hey guys, you know what this is going to do? I don't know if you just, never mind. I'll come back in a couple of years and I'll tell you, I told you so. But that's kind of where we're at right now, is we're kind of getting to that point where, I know that from my conversation before to this conversation, honestly, my fingers are crossed that the recession really takes hold and does what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm rooting for our economy and our society to really, come over the other side of the hill and see that, like, hey guys, this is a good thing. This is going to move us into a better direction. We just kind of have to take the slap on the back for a minute.
Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to. Is just, it's going to happen. It happens. It has always happened and will happen in the future. And hopefully you've got the savings, you've got the things in place to hopefully make it not as hard for you. But again, it's a part of economics. It's a part of the economy.
When I took economics, the brief amount of economics that I took in college, I really, really liked it. But one of the things that I gravitated to is this cyclical every 12-year process, where every 12 years you get basically a conflict that happens. Well, with Bush, that kind of stopped that situation and continued to propel the same conflict for a number of years up until Biden pulled the plug on Afghanistan. So That's neither here nor there. That's another topic that we probably won't ever talk about on this podcast. But the situation that I remember in economics was how, you can almost time it to a T, that about a 12-year cycle, you would see the U.S. enter into a conflict, almost stimulating the economy and pulling them out of a depression or a recession because of that. And so I'd be surprised to see that, like, if this heads in the normal forecast direction that it's done for the last, 60 years, that's what we're going to be looking at, is where are we going next? And that's just kind of my 15 minutes of economics that I got. So, please don't take that as any grain of salt whatsoever. No,
there is really a cycle to the entire pattern. I mean, you can go back, 1,000 years.
Yep.
And the cycle is there. You can map it. It's insane to look at and see the patterns. Now it changes because you've got different countries that are growing up out of other countries and things like that. But when you start mapping it all together and look at the true history of all of this, boy, that pattern is there. And yeah, you can map it.
Well, hey guys, I want to do this because otherwise we're gonna have the longest third episode ever. Just kidding, it's not that bad. But I'd like to talk about this. If you aren't interested in cost savings or whether or not you are doing the most affordable approach, but really, really interested in economic, like the not environmental or sustainability or those cool things like get an electric car, which, yeah, that's a whole other rabbit. But no, like in this sense, like I said, if you're a sustainability kind of guy and gal, this person, he's a Dutch inventor, and now they have these mushroom coffins. And it's not really the shape of a coffin. It's more like a sarcophagus sort of thing. It's a pod, and it has like grassiness on the inside that looks in the shape of a bed, like AstroTurf, but real and natural. But the makeup of it is basically, so it's mushroom roots. It's called mycelium mycelium. So the root system of mushrooms. And bonding is hemp fibers. And so basically this fiberglass thingy that's a pod, you can get put in. And so if you can imagine the process of trees and how trees are, you've got to grow a tree. It takes a while to grow a tree, especially a big tree enough for a coffin, and hopefully they'll get a couple out of it. But still, trees, it's going to take a while. Probably not this generation for you to get another tree that you cut down to replace that. Nuh-uh. So coffins, to make a real one, is actually longer. It takes longer. And then when you put that thing in the ground all glossy and coated and pretty, that thing ain't doing anything for many, many, many years, if anything at all. Why? Because you can dig up old graves that are wooden coffins that are still wooden coffins, like 100-year-old graves. So in this process, the biodegrading elements of this, it's barely a month, and it's broken down, and you are now you and Earth are becoming one real fast.
See, I want to find out more about this process. So I haven't heard anything about this. Adam came up with this one to talk about, and I haven't heard anything about this, but it seems really interesting because I am the person that I want a natural burial. I don't know why I always say barrier instead of burial. I want a natural burial, which means it is, and they have some in this area where there's no embalming fluid. There's none of this extra stuff that's put in. You're basically just laid in a biodegradable sheet and you're laid in the ground. And that's it. And humans are great. Well, pretty good fertilizer, depending on, how many,
are we talking like
chemicals you need for your life?
FDA approved eaters that, have so many preservatives in our body, it's probably going to take a couple years for our bodies to break down.
Yeah, I don't think that this would be on farmland for fertilizer.
Oh, okay.
But, for trees and flowers and those kinds of things, this is, we're great for that. And so, sustainability,
because farmers need to make extra money so they could supplement their land. Never mind. Sorry. I'll just stop.
I don't think we really want to go there. No, it's bad enough. My original thought of this was that somehow you were going to be growing mushrooms out of this. And so imagining,
I don't doubt that if, it's mushroom fiber. So, or like whatever, like mycelium. So there's a chance.
If you've got mushrooms growing out of this, and then, after a few years, your family comes and harvests the mushrooms off of your,
yeah, my dad, here. he was a real fun guy.
Wow. Wow. That is a dad joke if I have ever heard one. I get teased for my dad jokes. That wins.
Yes. All right. I'll take it. I think about like, the line where they're like, oh yeah, like I'm like a mushroom around here. They just, keep me in the dark and feed me crap. They use another word usually, but yeah, that phrase. And now you can die the same way.
There you go. There you go.
So anyway, that's about as much information as I have on that. I think just having that opportunity to consider. I know that there's another one that's more sustainable where it's like in the ball of like a tree ball. That you can do that one. Yep. I've seen that one, but that's like they take a full tree and you are like a cocoon underneath it. I'm like, do I come out as a leaf later in life? And and I'm like, leave me alone. I'm sorry.
All right. So you mentioned that. Okay. So I mentioned before that one of my hobbies is physics, and I was going to go into physics research before finding accounting. You joke about, are you going to come out as a leaf? I was joking with one of my kids last year, and it's now become a joke in our family. We eat dead people. We are all cannibals. Okay. Now, we're not going to talk about this here because that goes into, we're talking about particle physics and, atoms and all those things. That's a nice
Stay tuned.
Yeah, that's a nice long conversation. But you think about, as that tree grows, you decompose, your atoms, your particles, everything that makes you up will become part of that tree. And so you will, in essence, become a tree by being buried that way. Your pinky finger may become a leaf in that tree. It's a really cool thought.
Because it's the recycling of particles in our universe that is bound to only the amount of universal particles it is designed with. And so it is always an ever changing process, but never a reduction or an increase.
Matter is neither created nor destroyed.
But that's yes, we're already diving too far into the subject that's the extent of my knowledge about it, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
But yeah, I think that's a really cool thing to, that tree one is always fun to think about, but yeah, this is a really interesting topic. That's kind of cool. We might have some more information for you on a future podcast when we know more, which may be quite a few years, which, depending on how this podcast goes, may never actually happen.
I think it's a great one. I mean, we've been able to guide now. This is the third time for people in random directions of stuff maybe to do and stuff not to do. And so there you have it, guys. We're fulfilling the promise that we did. We made sure to undercommit so we can over-deliver.
That is right. That is right.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned for next time. I'm not really sure what we're going to talk about, but I'm sure it'll be just as entertaining as this one. Hopefully I won't fall asleep though. We'll see. But as always, don't forget to remember, check your shoes.